What's up, YouTube? This is Jakengard, and this is the live reaction video for the unveiling of PS5. So let's go. I am very much excited. PS5! PS5!
Hi. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the talk that we had
Huh?
planned for GDC. But we do have some super exciting news about PS5.
Yun na!
And who better to bring that to you than the one and only Mark Cerny. Without further ado, over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jim. There will be lots of chances later on this year to look at the PlayStation 5 games. Today, I want to talk a bit about our goals for the PlayStation 5 hardware and how they influenced the development of the console. I think you all know I'm a big believer in console generations. Once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, a console arrives with substantially new capabilities.
Oh my
There's a lot
god.
of learning by the game developers, hopefully not too overwhelming, and soon there's games that could never have been created before. Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of capabilities for the new console, and then build it in complete secrecy. For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3, a powerful and groundbreaking console, but also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games for. So, starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles. The first of these is listening to the developers, which is to say that a lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators. We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic games, which is to say that game creators matter. Anything we can do to make life easier for the game creators or help them realize their dreams, we will do. So, about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers and publishers, sit down, and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see. Some ideas for our own, but this requires weeks on the road, as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable. By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk. It's also key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and
Pati yung nanonood
now,
lang
with
eh.
PlayStation 1, 2,
Design.
and 3, the target
Dahil
was a
sa
revolution each time with
encov.
a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console. In the past, I've called this time to triumph. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles.
1 to 2
To be
months?
clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious,
tama.
and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision. What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running, and trying
Actually, PS4 took almost 2 years para tsaka na-release yung mga magagandang games. Noong umpisa halos wala pa.
We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity.
1 to 2 months? Wala pa masyadong games nun.
With PS5, the GPU was definitely
Yung nalaro ko lang NBA 2K14, Killzone, and Battlefield 4.
Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed. That feels like we're striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it.
Excited ako.
It's also very important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM. The increase in graphics performance over the past 2 decades has been astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators, and through them, the players. That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular 3D audio, isn't something that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to assist on that path. So here again are the 3
Pakita mo na
principles.
lang.
The first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design.
Paligoy-ligoy
For
ka pa
me,
eh.
SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer. And it was
SSD,
the number one
good.
ask from developers for PlayStation 5.
Solid state
As in,
drive.
we know it's probably impossible.
Para siyang flash
Can
drive,
we
sobrang
put an
bilis na.
SSD in?
Yung
That was the
pag-access sa
discussion we were
file,
also having
hindi na
with
siya
Sony.
hard drive.
It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray
Positive
disc speeds were now
for
possible.
hard
At the same
drive
time,
is
though, in
mura siya.
2015 and
Mahal kasi
2016,
ang
when we
SSD.
were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive. And a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load speeds. I
Mabagal
want to
mag-load.
focus in on just
Kasi
one number
nagsispin pa
here,
siya.
which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means
PS5,
loading a gigabyte takes
PS5.
10 seconds. If you compress your game
Naantok
packages,
na
you
ako,
can
ang
fit
tagal.
more data on the Blu-ray disc and
Tama
also
na yung
effectively
pagsasalita.
boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data on the disc and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking and only 1/3 of its time actually loading data. Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive. Now, a gigabyte is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD? If we could load 5 gigabytes a second from it, what would change? Now, SSDs are completely different from hard drives. They don't have seeks as such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD, you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that second, pretty much at speed.
True.
As for time to load a gigabyte, this is next gen we're talking about, so memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2 gigabytes. And the answer is about 1/4 of a second. I mean, that's amazing. We're talking
Pero may
2 orders
cons
of
din
magnitude,
yung
meaning very
SSD.
roughly 100 times faster. Which means at 5 gigabytes a second for the SSD, the potential is that in a second, there are no load screens. The game just fades down while loading a half dozen gigabytes. And fades
Over
back up.
time, magdedegrade
Same
yung
for a
quality
reload. You're
ng
immediately
solid
back in
state
action after
drive,
you die.
unlike hard
And
drive.
fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me, this is not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD.
PS5,
The primary
PS5.
reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer is trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have two rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory, which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets. Having a 30-second elevator ride is a little extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds like we did for Haven City when we were making Jak 2. The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of
Hindi mo
work,
makikita
but
kasi yung
still,
ibang
it's a
area
giant distraction
habang
for a
naglalakad
team
ka,
that just
naglo-load din
wants to
sila.
make their game. So when I talked
Kaya
about the
natatakpan.
dream of an SSD, part of the
Yun
reason
yung
for that
dati
5
nilang
gigabyte a second target was to eliminate
technique
loads, but also
para
part of the
tanggalin
reason
yung
for that
load
target was
times.
streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second? If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4
Hindi naman
gigabytes
siya
of compressed data
impossible.
in one.
Mahal lang
That sounds
talaga.
about right
For now,
next
yung
gen.
SSD.
Anyway, back to the hard drive.
Sobra.
Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But there's a downside too, which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks and therefore is on the hard drive many
Mukhang puro
times.
technical lang tayo
Marvel
ngayon.
Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it
I
works
was
very
waiting
well
for the
increasing
design,
the streaming
kahit
speed,
papano.
there's a
After ng
massive
technical,
duplication
sana
as a
meron.
result. Some of the
Sana.
objects like mailboxes or
Excited
news racks are on the
to
hard
see.
drive 400 times.
And
What I'm
other new
describing here
features
are
for the
things that
PS5.
cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, the PlayStation 4 will sometimes
PS5,
take a long time to
PS5.
install the patch. That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion.
One of the
Otherwise,
problem
every
of
change
hard
would
drive
add a seek
is
or two.
defragmentation.
Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough. With an SSD, though, no seeks. So no
Kasi
need
walang
to make
partition
brand new
yung
files with the changes
SSD.
incorporated into it, which means
Iba yung
no
structure
installs
niya
as you know
compared
today.
sa hard drive.
There's yet one more benefit, which is that system memory can be used much more efficiently. On PlayStation 4, game data
8
on the
gig
hard drive
RAM
feels
for
very distant
PS4.
and difficult to use. By the time you realize you need a piece of data, it's much too late to go out and load it. So system memory has to contain all of the data that could
I
be
think
used in the next
PS5 would
30
have a
seconds or so
bare
of gameplay.
minimum
That
of
means a
32
lot of the 8
gigabyte
gigabytes
of RAM.
system memory is
Should.
idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is
16
very
lang.
close to being like more RAM. Typically, it's fast
16?
enough that when you realize you need a piece of data, you can just load
Really?
it from the SSD and use it. There's no need to have lots of data parked in system memory waiting
That's
to
slow.
potentially be used. A different way of saying that is
For
that
native
most of the
4K,
RAM is working on the game's
16
ahead.
gig is low.
This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the
Really?
SSD reduces
Walang
the
Pro?
need for a massive intergenerational increase in size. So, back to the dream of the SSD. Here's the set of targets. Boot the game in a second. No load screens.
Mhm.
Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages or long corridors. More game on the disk and more game on the SSD. And finally, those patch installs go away.
Mas
The
mabilis pa
reality,
yung
though, is
download
that
ko
the
sa
SSD
patching
is just one
ng
piece
game.
of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD and the game code that uses the data. You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an SSD with 10 times the speed of a standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed, if that. The
True.
PlayStation
Pag
5,
gumamit ka
our
ng
goal was
SSD
not just that the
sa
SSD itself be 100
PS4
times faster.
ngayon
It was that
hindi
game
ganun
loads and streaming would be
kabilis
100
yung
times faster.
or
So
hindi ganun
every
ka
single potential
laki yung
bottleneck needs to be
significance ng
addressed.
speed
And
na
there are a
in-increase
lot of them.
dahil hindi
Let's
siya
look at check-in and what
optimize.
happens when its overhead gets 100 times larger. Conceptually,
Pwede,
check-in is a
pero
pretty
hindi
simple process. Data
optimize.
is loaded
Napabilis
into system
times 2,
memory from the hard
pero
drive or
hindi
SSD.
yung times
It's
10
examined, a
na
few values are
pwedeng
tweaked to
maibigay
check
ng
in,
PS5.
and then it's moved to its final location. At the SSD speeds we're talking about, that last part, moving the data, meaning copying it from one location to another, takes roughly an entire next-gen CPU core. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all the overheads get
Sony
100 times
Vaio.
larger, that will cripple the frame
Hindi sila
rate as
gumamit
soon as
ng
the player
Windows
moves, and
or
that massive stream of
Mac.
data starts coming off the SSD. So to solve all of that, we built a lot of
Custom
hardware,
flash
namely
controller.
a custom flash controller and a number of custom units in our main chip. The flash controller in the SSD was designed for smooth and bottleneck-free operation, but also with games in mind. For example, there are 6 levels of priority when reading from the SSD. Priority is very important. You can imagine the player heading into some new location in the world and the game requesting a few gigabytes of textures. And while those textures are being loaded, an enemy is shot and has to speak a few dying words. Having multiple priority levels lets the audio for those dying words get loaded immediately. On one side, that flash controller connects to the actual flash dies that supply the storage. To reach our
12
bandwidth
channel
target of 5
interface.
gigabytes a second, we ended up with a 12-channel interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. The resulting bandwidth we achieved is actually 5.5 gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most
Hindi ko lang sure
natural
anong
size
architecture
that emerges
ginamit
for an
nila for
SSD
PS5.
is 825 gigabytes. The key question for
Is
us
it
was,
custom architecture?
is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but Flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our gaming audience to be cost-effective with regards to what
Or
we put in
gumamit
console.
sila ng
Ultimately, we
existing
resolved
from
this question
PC.
by looking at the play patterns of a broad range of gamers. We examined the specific games that they were playing over the course of a weekend or a week or a month, and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD. We were able to
So makita
establish
na
that the
design,
friction
please.
caused by reinstalls or redownloads was
Oopsie.
quite low, and so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it. I'll go through the details in a moment. Back to the flash controller. On the
825
other
gig.
side, it connects to our main custom chip via 4
PCI
lanes of Gen 4
4.0.
PCI. And inside the main custom chip is a pretty hefty unit dedicated to I/O. Before we talk about what that does, let's talk compression for a moment. PlayStation 4 used zlib as its compression format. We decided to use it again on PlayStation 5, but on my 2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken from Rad Game Tools. It's like
Release the
zlib's
Kraken.
smarter cousin. Simple, similar types of algorithms, but about 10% better compression, which is pretty big. That means 10% more game on the UHD Blu-ray disc or on the SSD. Kraken had only been out for a year, but it was already becoming a de facto industry standard. Half of the teams I talked to were either using it or getting ready to evaluate it. So we hustled and built a custom decompressor into the I/O unit, one capable of handling over 5 gigabytes of Kraken format input data a second. After decompression, that typically becomes 8 or 9 gigabytes, but the unit itself is capable of outputting as much as 22 gigabytes a second if the data happen to compress particularly well. By the way, in terms of performance, that custom decompressor equates to 9 of our Zen 2 cores. That's what it would take to decompress the Kraken stream with the conventional CPU. There's a lot more in the custom I/O unit, including a dedicated DMA controller. The game can direct exactly where it wants to send the data coming off of the SSD. This equates to another Zen 2 core or 2 in terms of its copy performance. Its primary purpose is to remove check-in as a bottleneck. There's 2 dedicated I/O coprocessors and a large RAM pool. These aren't
Two
Zen
I/O
2 cores. They're there principally to direct the variety of custom hardware around them. One of the coprocessors is dedicated to SSD I/O. This lets us bypass traditional file I/O and its bottlenecks when reading from the SSD. The other is responsible for memory mapping, which I know doesn't sound like anything related to the SSD, but a lot of developers map and remap memory as part of file I/O, and this too can become a bottleneck. There are coherency engines to assist the coprocessors. Coherency comes up a lot in places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches. Flushing all of the GPU caches whenever the SSD is read is an unattractive option. It could really hurt the GPU performance.
I'm not
So
sure what's
we've
DMA
implemented a gentler
for.
way of doing things, where the coherency engines inform the GPU of the
Cache
overwritten address ranges,
scrubbers.
and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches do pinpoint evictions of just those address ranges. The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed. You just indicate
True.
what data you'd like to read
Hardware na
from
yung
the
bahala
original
dun.
uncompressed
And I
file,
don't even
where
know
you'd
some
like
of
to put
them.
it, and the whole process of loading it happens invisibly to you and at very high speed. Back to the Dream. Thanks to all of that surrounding hardware,
So
our 5.5
PS5
gigabytes a
is
second really should translate
a
into something like 100
full
times
SSD,
faster
hindi
IO
rin siya
speeds for it,
hybrid
and
kasi
allow the dream of
I was
no load
expecting
screens
baka
and
nabanggit nila yung
super-fast streaming
hybrid
to
pero
become a
wala.
reality. Having said
So
that,
it is a full
expandability of our
SSD.
SSD is going to be quite important. Flash is costly, and you may very well want to add storage to whatever we put.
And I think
Now, the
500
storage
gigabyte
we use
is
depends on
too
how you're
small.
going to use it. If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library and you'd like to take advantage of backwards compatibility to play those games on PlayStation 5, then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on
Okay.
the hard drive and play them directly from there, thus
Wow.
saving the pricier SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles. Or you can copy your active
Siguro
PlayStation 4
provided you
titles
have
to
the same
SSD.
account
If
for
your
the
purpose in
PS4 and
adding more storage
PS5,
is to play
just
PlayStation
plug and
5
play
titles, though,
yung
ideally you
external
would
hard
add your
drive
SSD
from
slot.
PS4 to
We will be
PS5
supporting
and
certain
mababasa na
M2
raw yung
SSDs.
games,
These are internal drives
which
that you can
really
get on the open
proves
market and
the
install in a
existence
day
of
in the
backward
PlayStation 5. As for which ones we
compatibility
support
of
and
PS4
when, I'll get
games.
to that in a moment. They connect through the custom I/O unit, just like our SSD does. So they can take full advantage of the decompression, I/O coprocessors, and all the other features I was talking about. Here's the catch, though. That commercial drive has to be at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive.
Mhm.
When I gave the Wired interview last year,
Yan yung
I
luma.
said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything available on PC. At the time, commercial M2 drives used PCIe 3.0, and 4 lanes of that cap out at 3.5 gigabytes a second. In other words, no PCIe 3.0 drive can hit the required spec. M2 drives with PCIe 4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting our samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said that, we are comparing apples and oranges, though, because that commercial M2 drive will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can use. And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with only 2 priority levels, definitely, but our custom I/O unit has to arbitrate the extra priorities rather than the M2 drive's flash controller.
Gumagalaw
And so
ba yung
the
nanonood
M2
sa
drive
kanya?
needs a little extra speed to
Hindi
take
na.
care of issues
Design
arising
lang
from a
yun.
different approach.
Selway.
That commercial drive also needs to physically fit inside of the bay we created in PlayStation 5 for M2 drives.
Gusto ko makakita ng
Unlike
design.
internal hard drive,
Design
there's
please.
unfortunately
Kahit
no
design
standard
concept
for
man
the
lang
height
na
of
galing
M2
mismo
drives.
sa Sony.
And some M2 drives have giant
Please.
heat sinks. In fact, some of them even have their own fans. Right now, we're getting M2 drive samples and benchmarking them in various ways. When games hit beta as they get ready for the PlayStation 5 launch at year-end, we'll also be doing some compatibility testing
So
to make
sinabi
sure
niya na
that the architecture
PS5
of
is
particular M2
launching
drives
at
isn't too foreign
year-end.
for the games to handle. Once we've done that compatibility testing, we should be able to start letting you
I
know
was
which
expecting
drives
it
will
to be
physically
pushed
fit
next year
and which drive samples
due to the
benchmark
outbreak of
appropriately
the
high during
virus.
testing.
Pero
It would
I
be
think
great if that happened by launch.
they are
but
still
it's
trying
likely
to
be
push it
a
for
bit
this
past
year.
it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive until you hear from us. Okay, back to our principles. Balancing evolution and revolution is the second of them. This was definitely a recurring theme with the GPU. We need new GPU features and capabilities. If we only have more performance, it's not really a new generation of console. Of course, many of these capabilities result in more performance. That's part of why a PlayStation 5 teraflop is more powerful than a PlayStation 4 teraflop. But we aren't just looking for the performance. We also need the ability to do something with the GPU
The question
that
is
could
if
not have been done.
PS5 is more
And we
powerful
need higher
than the
performance per
Xbox
watt.
Series
Every
X.
time we double the performance of some GPU component, we don't want to find out we've doubled the power consumed and the heat reduced. But at the same time, we have to make sure the GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers to adopt. Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key need throughout the design process. As our solution to adding new features without blindsiding developers, we made sure that if there were new significant features, it would be optional to use them. The GPU supports ray tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing to make your game. The GPU supports primitive shaders, but you can release your first game on PlayStation 5 without making any use of it. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology. What does that mean? AMD is continuously improving and revising their tech. For RDNA 2, their goals were, roughly speaking, to reduce power consumption by re-architecting the GPU to put data close to where it's needed, to optimize the GPU for performance, and to add a new, more advanced feature set. But that feature set is malleable, which is to say that we have our own needs for PlayStation, and that can factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up being just for us. If you see a similar discrete GPU available as a PC card at roughly the same time as we release our console, that means our collaboration with AMD succeeded in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's dangerous to rely on teraflops as an absolute indicator of performance, and CU count should be avoided as well. In the case of CPUs, we all understand this. The PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 each have 8 CPUs, but we never think that meant the capabilities and performance are equal. It's the same for CUs. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features means adding lots of transistors. In fact, the transistor count for a PlayStation 5
Yung sinasabing
CPU
backward
is
compatibility,
62% larger
mukhang
than the
ni-structure
transistor
nila
count for
yun
PlayStation
based sa
4
PS4
CPU.
console,
Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU
then
is
they work
backwards
it
compatible
up
with
to
PlayStation 4.
PS5.
What does that mean?
So,
One
meaning,
way you can achieve
hindi siya backward
compatibility
compatible to
is to put the
PS1 to
previous
PS3.
console's chipset in the new console, like we did with some PlayStation 3s. But that's, of course, extremely expensive. A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips, meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards
Tatlo lang,
compatibility is
PS4,
in the console,
PS4 Pro, and
it's in.
PS5.
It's not
Walang
as if a
PS2
cost
and
down
PS3.
will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification of functionality took years of efforts by AMD, as any roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence in logic.
Online
Running
class.
PS4 and PS4 titles
Mukhang
at
naging
boosted frequencies has
nagkaroon tayo
also
ng
added
klase
complexity.
dito.
The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis. Results are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by playtime, and we're expecting almost all of them to be playable at launch on PlayStation 5. With regards to new features, as I said, our strategy was to try to break new ground, but at the same time not to require use of the new GPU capabilities. For more than a decade, GPUs have imposed a restriction on game engines. Software handles vertex processing, but for the most part, dedicated hardware is responsible for the triangles and other geometry that the vertices form. That means it's not possible to do even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which brings handling of triangles and other primitives under full programmatic control. As a game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use the PlayStation 5 GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU, or you can use this new intelligence in various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing backfaced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the
May
fly.
PS5 na
as
ako,
it's
hindi
being
pa nga
made.
release.
It's a brand new
Wala pa kang
capability.
design.
Using primitive shaders on PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of techniques, including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural detail to close-up objects,
Masyadong
and
technical
improvements to
yung
particle effects and
pagka-
other visual special effects. Another major new feature of our custom RDNA 2-based GPU is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC GPUs. The CUs contain a new specialized unit called the intersection engine, which can calculate the intersection of rays with boxes and triangles. To use the intersection engine, first you build what is called an acceleration structure. It's data in RAM that contains all of your geometry. There's a specific set of formats you can use. They're variations on the same VDH concept. Then, in your shader program, you use a new instruction that asks
PS5
the
will only be
intersection engine
compatible
to check a ray
from the
against
previous
the
gen
VDH.
up to PS from the
While the
present. So
intersection engine
PS4
is
lang
processing the
and
requested
PS5
ray
games.
triangle or ray box intersections,
Yung
the shaders
PS1 to
are free to
PS3
do otherwise.
malalaro siya
Having said that,
through
the ray
PS
tracing instruction
Now,
is pretty memory
which is
intensive, so
digital.
it's a good mix with logic-heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will
Medyo
run just
boring.
fine on PlayStation 5. But it presents an
Kahit na
opportunity
computer
for those
engineer
interested.
ako, hindi ko siya
I'm
na-appreciate yung mga
thinking it'll take
pinagsasabi
less
niya.
than a million
I'm so
rays a
sorry.
second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion and
Gusto ko lang
reverb
i-clear
calculation.
kung bakit hindi
With a bit more
compatible
of the
yung
GPU invested in
PS1 to
ray tracing,
PS3.
it should be possible
Iba
to
kasi
do some
yung
very nice
disc-based
global
nila.
illumination.
Yung,
Having said
ang
that,
tawag doon?
adding ray traced
Sabihin na natin
shadows
yung
and reflections to a traditional
retina
graphics engine
nung ano,
could easily
pagbabasa
take
ng
hundreds
disc.
of millions of
Iba
rays a
kasi,
second.
with
And full
PS4
ray
and
tracing
PS5, both
built
they
in.
are Blu-ray
How far can we go?
HD.
I'm starting to get quite
Though
bullish. I've
PS3
already
is
seen a
Blu-ray
PlayStation
din,
5 title
it
that's
has a different
successfully using
architecture.
ray tracing-based reflections in complex animated scenes with only
The way it
modest
reads
costs.
the disc,
Another set
iba
of
siya sa
issues for
PS4.
the GPU involved size and frequency. How big do we make the GPU, and what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why. Here's two possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate teraflops, you get the same number. But actually, the performance is noticeably different because teraflops is defined as the computational capability of the vector ALU. That's just one part of the GPU. There are a lot of other units.
Naghihintay din ako ng
And those
trailer.
other units
Yung mga
all
hindi
run
dito
faster
yung
when the
trailer.
GPU frequency is higher. At 33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have
Hindi
that
ikaw
much
yung
higher bandwidth,
gumawa
and
ng
so on.
PS5.
About the only
Kahit
downside is that system
gaano
memory is
ka-technical,
33%
hindi mo
further away in
maintindihan
terms
mga
of cycles.
pinagsasabi niya.
But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that.
Kasi
As a
wala
friend of
kang
mine
idea
says,
eh.
a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs
Para
in
kang
parallel than it is to
nagkukwento
fully use
kung
48
paano
CUs.
pumunta
When
sa
triangles are small, it's much
France.
harder to fill all those CUs with
Tas,
useful work. So there's a lot
sinasabi
to
niya
be
sa'yo kung
said
saan
for
ka
faster,
dadaan. Pero
assuming you
hindi
can
mo alam
handle
yung
the
mga daan na
resulting
yun.
power and heat
Ganon
issues,
ang
which
nangyayari
frankly
ngayon.
we haven't always done the best job at. Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how
Ang
much
daming-
electrical power games will consume
Ang daming
and how much heat
sinasabi.
will be produced as a result
Diyos
inside
ko
of the
po.
console. Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine quality. It's about the minutia of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much. Our process on previous consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum power consumption during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution that we think will be quiet at that power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly. PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions that consume a lot of power. These are great here and there, but presumably only minimally used.
Bakit ganun?
Or are they? If we plan for major 256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock substantially lower or noticeably increase the size of the power supply and fan. So, after much discussion, we decided to go with a very different direction on PlayStation 5. We built a GPU with 36
TED
CUs.
Talk.
Mind you, RDNA 2 CUs are large. Each has 62% more transistors than the CUs we were using on PlayStation 4. So if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA 2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly sizable GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for PlayStation 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach
Shout
the
out kay,
capabilities
ano,
of the system's cooling solution.
Kay
It's a completely different paradigm.
Rivera.
Rather than running at constant frequency and letting
Kay
power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially
MMK.
constant power and let the frequency vary based on the
Wala
workload.
eh.
We then
Shoutout
tackled
kay,
the
ano,
engineering
Hentai
challenge of a
Gaming. Mukhang
cost-effective
magkakasundo
and
kayo ni James
high-performance
Wakan.
cooling solution designed
James!
for that specific power level. In
Shoutout
some
kay
ways,
James.
it becomes a simpler
Shoutout
problem
kay
because there are
Burger
no
Queen.
more unknowns. There's no need
Shoutout
to
kay
guess what
Sugetsu
power
Udela.
consumption the worst-case game might
Kay
have.
John Brian Corpus.
As for the
kay
details of the
MTails.
cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think
Oo,
you'll be
tama,
quite happy
MMK
with what
to.
the engineering team came up with. So, how fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest
Tagal?
approach would be to look at the
Gusto ko yung
actual
design eh.
temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a
Simple
consistent
lang naman
PlayStation
dapat
5
naging sinabi
experience.
nyo.
It wouldn't
Kung
do
ilan
to
yung
run a
gig
console slower simply
ng RAM,
because it was in a hot
ilan
room.
yung gig ng GPU.
So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die,
Anong
we look at the
CPU, mukhang
activities that the
AMD.
GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis,
Anong
which makes
architecture, mukhang
everything
custom chip
deterministic
ginawa nyo.
and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use
SSD yung
AMD's Smart
PS5.
Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels. The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking
Oh,
like an
magaling mag-vlog yan
unreachable
si
target with the
James
old
Wakan.
fixed frequency strategy. With this new
Nag-i-improve na siya.
paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23
Salamat,
gigahertz so that we
Kishin,
can guarantee that the
sa
on-chip logic
pag-view.
operates properly.
Yung labas
36
ng
CUs
PS5,
at
nabanggit niya
2.23
kanina
gigahertz
na
is
by the
10.3
end of the
teraflops.
year.
And we expect
So,
the GPU
expect
to
natin
spend
within the
most
year
of its
kasi
time at
akala ko
or
rin
close to
na
that frequency and performance.
mapupush
Similarly,
yung
running the CPU at 3
mapupush
gigahertz
yung
was
release
causing
date
headaches with
ng
the
PS5 to next year dahil sa
Now we can
naging
run
outbreak.
PS5 at
Siyempre,
3.5
tinamaan yung buong
gigahertz. In
mundo.
fact, it spends most of
Lalo na yung China, yung manufacturing, baka mapush.
That doesn't mean
Pero
all
sabi niya,
games will be running
sabi na
at
kanina, yung
2.23
nagsasalita,
gigahertz and 3.5
by the end of the
gigahertz.
year,
When that
yung
worst
release
case
ng
game
PS5.
arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our
Times
3
two.
principles was about finding new
Sana lang may
dreams.
times
It's
2 kasi
important for us on the hardware team to find
Wala
new
live
ways
to
to
eh.
expand or deepen
Gusto ko rin
gaming, and that's
i-times
what led
two.
us to a focus on 3D audio. As players, we experience the game through the visuals, through audio, and through the feedback we receive from the controller, such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact of audio is huge as well. At the same time, the audio team on a
after
game project has to do
after
a lot with a
magsalita
little.
niya,
For
get
example,
one
on PlayStation 4, there's
uh,
fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores.
one half.
Audio typically
Shit.
ends up getting just
Sorry.
a
Tagal ko
fraction
na
of
kasi
a
hindi
core.
nag-aaral
That's
eh.
not much of a
Kuha kayo ng
computational
papel,
resource, particularly when you
yellow
consider
pad
that the
na lang.
visuals run at 30 or 60 frames
Essay
a
ito.
second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second. So, it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost a perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous DMA and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point unit. There's unfortunately nothing
Magkano
comparable on PlayStation 4.
PS5?
Probably
Target
the
nila
most
kasi,
dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with
VR.
virtual
Target nilang
reality.
price for
The
PS5
PSVR
is
hardware has its own
around
audio unit.
500 USD.
It supports about
So
50
that's
pretty decent 3D sound
25,000
sources.
pesos sa atin.
And this provided a hint
And
as to
it
where we
can
could go
go
with
up
audio, as
to
well as some valuable
35,000.
experience.
Yun.
Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 5.
Hindi ba
The
ng
first
PS
goal was
ng
great
25?
audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral. The second goal was to support hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality.
Goals
Now,
for
when we
audio.
say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's
so
not,
sa
of course,
VR
something
to.
we thought we could perfectly achieve, but the idea was that if we stopped using just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources
Mas
for
boring
raindrops
pa,
hitting the
actually.
ground at all sorts of locations around
Some
you,
parang
then
meeting
at
lang
some
sa
point your
office.
brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game. This has the capacity to affect your appreciation of the game, just like
Kahit,
music in a
actually,
game does.
kahit yung nagsasalita,
The
inaantok na
concept of
siya sa
locality is
sinasabi
simpler.
niya.
It's just your sense of where the audio is coming from. To the right of you, behind you, above you. This can
Hinihintay ko
immerse
talaga
you
yung
further in the
design.
game,
Yun
and it can
yung
also
hinahabol ko.
directly enhance the
Excited
gameplay.
ako makita yung design. Kahit
To use
concept man
Dead
lang
Space
sana.
as an example, I know, old school. You're fighting enemies in fairly dark, spooky locations. Back in the day, if you played the game using the TV speakers, you could tell that there was one last enemy growling and hunting you down, but it was difficult to tell quite where that enemy was. With headphones, you could tell that the enemy was somewhere on the right, which let you
mysterious man
deduce,
kasi.
if you couldn't see it, that it must be somewhere behind and to your right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely there, and you turn and you take it out. So, how do we know where a sound is coming from in the first place? Well, all those bumps and
Nakatapos pa lang
folds in
yung
the
vlog
ear
ko
have a
kanina.
meaning, evolutionarily
Actually,
speaking.
nasa ano na
Based
ako
on
eh.
what direction the
Sa
sound is
Neo
coming
2.
from, sound waves bounce
Nasa
around
pang
inside
12
the ear,
boss na
there's
ako.
some constructive and
Yung vlog
destructive
ko pang
interference,
5th
and the
pa lang.
result is a
Ang
change in
bagal.
volume. The
Bawal ko
phase of the sound
mag-record.
also shifts, depending on what
Kasi
path the
pinapractice
sound
ko pa
wave
talaga na
took to reach
perfect
the ear
run.
canal. These
Bago ko siya
volume
i-vlog.
changes and phase shifts are different for each direction and also vary depending on the frequency of the sound. Head size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion. The way that the sound changes, based on direction and frequency, can be encoded in a table called the Head-Related Transfer Function, or HRTF. Here's part of one. The vertical axis is the frequency, the horizontal axis is the direction, front, back, left, right, and the color gives the degree of attenuation of the sound at that frequency. The HRTF is as unique to an individual as a fingerprint is. In fact, you're looking at mine right now. Here's how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals, and then sit the subject down in the middle of an array of 22 speakers. We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations. Using an HRTF when rendering audio creates unparalleled quality, but it's
Wala na akong
computationally
idea sa
expensive.
pinag-uusapan.
The simplest way to use an
sinasabi.
HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 locations we sample. Unfortunately, the processing has to be done in frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's multiple fast Fourier transforms needed for every sound source for every audio tick. That's a lot of multiplies. This computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy.
Sa
It
Xbox
meant we had
Series
to bite
X,
the bullet
plan ko
and
siyang
design and
bilhin
build a custom hardware
kasabay
unit
ng
for 3D
PS5.
audio. Collectively,
Yun.
we're referring to the hardware unit and
Kasi
the proprietary
na-intrigue din ako sa
algorithms we
kanya.
run on it as Tempest 3D Audio Tech. The meaning of 3D audio and technology should be pretty obvious here. As for Tempest, I feel it really reflects our goals with audio. It suggests a certain intensity of experience and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the hardware unit that we built the Tempest engine. It's based on AMD's GPU technology. We modified a compute unit in such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal for audio? So the Tempest engine has no caches, just like an SPU.
Kahit
All
isang
data
sulyap man
access
lang
is
sa
via
PS5.
DMA, just like
Gusto
an
ko siya
SPU.
makita.
Our target was that it would have more power than a CPU thanks
Anong
to the
hell?
parallelism
Layo
that a
mo na rin
GPU
dun,
can
James,
achieve,
eh.
and that it would be more efficient
I-vlog
than
mo
our
kasi
GPU
nilalaro
thanks to
mo.
the SPU-like architecture. The goal being to make possible near 100% utilization of the CU's vector units. Where we ended up is a unit with roughly the same SIMD power and bandwidth as all 8 Jaguar cores in the
yung
PlayStation 4
Microsoft,
combined.
hindi sila
If we were to
natakot
use
na
the same
unang
algorithms as
mag-release
PSVR,
ng
that's
design.
enough for something like
Yung
5,000
Sony kasi
sound sources.
medyo ano eh.
But of course, we want to use more complex
Design-wise, medyo
algorithms, and we
maarte
don't
sila.
need anything like
Yung
that
Xbox
number
all
of
throughout,
sounds.
from Xbox 360.
It would have been
simpleng
wonderful
ganun
if a
lang,
simpler
box.
strategy, such as
Diba? Kung
using
makikita niyo yung
Dolby
Xbox
Atmos peripherals, could have
X.
achieved our goals, but we wanted 3D audio for all,
Xbox One,
not just those with
Xbox
licensed
One S,
soundbars or the
saka
like.
Series.
Also, we
Xbox
wanted many
One
hundreds
X.
of sound sources, not just the
Halos
32
same
that
lang
Atmos
size,
supports.
yung style,
And finally,
style.
we wanted to be able to
Yung
throw an
PS4 medyo
overwhelming amount
pinapakomplika
of
nila.
processing
Meron
power
pang
at the problem, and it wasn't
mukhang
clear what
stair
any
pa eh, pag
peripheral might have
pinatong-patong mo yung
inside of it.
Slim tsaka yung Pro.
In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate
Pero
some
hula
to
ko
the
kasi
games,
sa PS5
to the extent
design.
that games want to make
Gusto
use
nilang gawin yung
of
letter V
convolution
dahil
reverb
5.
and other algorithms that
Gusto
are either
nilang
computationally
talagang
expensive
i-emphasize
or need high
yung
bandwidth.
V na design
But
sa
the
console.
primary purpose of the Tempest
Pero hindi ko
engine
alam kung
remains
paano.
3D audio. Now, 3D audio is a major academic research topic. It's safe to say that no one in the world has all of the answers. And the set of algorithms that has to be invented, tuned, or implemented to realize our vision for 3D audio is immense. For example, use of HRTFs in games is quite complex. Before, I talked about
Ako rin
making a sound
nantok na
source
eh.
appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 HRTF sample locations. But for
Abangan niyo
high-quality
bukas yung
3D
video
game audio, we
ni
have
James
to handle other
Wakan.
possibilities. The
Ipopost
sound
na
source
niya
might not be at one of the
yung
1,000
vlog niya
HRTF
sa
sample
wakas.
locations. So we have to
So,
blend
abangan niyo yung
the
video niya.
HRTF data from the closest locations that we have sent. The sound
Bagay.
source might be moving, which needs very special handling as that
Ayoko
blend
na rin
keeps
makinig
changing,
dito. Nung
and that
umpisa
can
okay
cause
pa eh, yung
phase
mga tungkol sa
artifacts in the
RAM,
resulting audio.
tungkol sa
Or
SSD,
the sound source might have a
sa
size to
GPU.
it, meaning it should
Pero,
feel as if it's coming from an area
wala nang
rather
alam
than
dito.
a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources. But alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics be
Ambisonics.
somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different approaches. That's a
True.
lot of variation.
Actually,
it's nice to have
sa
the
pag-develop ng
computational
game,
resources
hindi
of
lang
the
basta
Tempest engine.
mag-create ka ng
But it's
sound.
clear that achieving
Kasi
our
kailangan
ultimate goals
mong
with 3D audio is
intindihin
going to
yung
be a
ano,
multi-year,
yung meron na tayong
step-by-step process.
mono,
Having
meron
said
tayong
that, headphone audio
mono stereo
implementation
halos
is
same
largely
lang. Pero yung
completed this time.
5.1 surround sound
It was a
and
natural place for us to
7.1,
start. With
kung
headphones, we
saan
control
lalabas
exactly what each ear hears,
yung
and therefore the algorithmic development
sound,
and implementation are more
pag
straightforward.
yung headset nyo may
For
3D
TV speakers and stereo speakers,
at may
we're in the
multiple
process of
speakers sa loob,
implementing
yun,
virtual
nakaprogram
surround
pa
sound.
yun per
The
game.
idea being that if
Medyo
you're sitting in a sweet spot in
complicated
front of the
siya,
TV, then the sound
have
can be
tried
made
to
to feel as
develop
if it's coming from any direction,
for
even behind. Virtual surround sound has a lot in
Mobile
common
games.
with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running.
Actually,
We're now
hindi
looking
na
at
to
increasing the size
PS5
of that sweet
dependent.
spot, which is
Depende
to
na
say,
to sa game.
making the area you need to
Kaya
be in to
bakit niya
feel the 3D
dinidiscuss
effect
ito
larger. And we're
sa
also working to boost the
PS5?
sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D
Hindi na
audio
to
on
sakop ng
PlayStation 5,
hardware.
but we're going to see what we can do to
Software-based na
bring
to eh.
virtual surround sound to a similar level, after which we'll start in on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound.
Sige.
It's now to the
Siguro
point where some of the
masyadong ang
PlayStation 5
complicated
games in
yung mga
development are
pinagsasabi niya.
extensively using
I'll
these
try
systems.
to review it
One of the
again
game demos allows you to
at
toggle
i-explain ko
between
na lang in a
conventional
more
PlayStation 4 style stereo
simplest
audio
form
and our new 3D
yung mga
audio.
pinagsasabi niya
I listened with
at
just
mas
an
maiksi
ordinary pair of
at siguro
over-the-ear
mas magandang
headphones,
visual
and wow,
kahit
I could feel
papaano.
a difference. 3D audio has that dimensional feel to it.
Di ko rin gusto mga
Conventional
pinagsasabi
stereo
nito
audio
eh.
feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I entered the matrix? Does my brain believe I'm really there? Like I was talking about
True,
earlier
yung
when
topic
I
niya hindi
explained
na
a target
for
presence.
simple
Well,
consumers.
the answer is no, but you've probably caught on to what's
At
missing
hindi rin
here,
pang
namely
investor.
whose HRTF was being used. It wasn't
More
mine. It was
likely
the
for
default
ano na to eh.
HRTF. The audio team
Hardware
analyzed the hundreds that
engineers.
they measured and chose the one they felt was the closest fit to the total game playing audience. This shows a piece of the default HRTF on the left and my HRTF on the right. You can see that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different. With the
Salamat
default
Hentai
HRTF, as
Gaming
I
sa
said, the
panonood
3D
sa
audio
vlog
sounds pretty
namin.
great. When I use
Salamat.
my HRTF, though, the audio reaches a higher level of realism, which is to say that when using
Meme.
headphones
Sige,
and
gawa
my
ko naman meme.
HRTF, I occasionally get fooled and even
Baka
think a
gawa ka
sound
na
is
meme.
coming from the real world when it's actually coming from the game. A corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they
Si
can toggle
Kaloy,
between
hindi ko
PS4
alam.
style and PS5 style audio and
James,
not
gising
sense
pa ba
much
siya?
difference. I've had a
Ang
few
alam ko yung
people
mamaya
describe
na
the
lang siya
PlayStation
manonood
5
at
3D
iba-vlog
audio
din
as
niya.
sounding like
Natulog
a bit
na ata,
better
hindi
stereo
rin kasi
audio.
maganda pakiramdam niya
Presumably
eh.
they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram. Which means what HRTF you're using is key. I'd like everyone to be able to
Tulog
experience
na.
what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure
Ay,
the
online ba
HRTF
siya?
of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest technology matures. At PlayStation 5 launch, we'll be offering a choice of 5 HRTFs. There's a simple test where you pick the one that gives you the best locality. That's just the first step, though. This is an open-ended research topic. Maybe you'll be sending us a photo of your ear, and we'll choose a neural network to pick the
Diyos
closest
ko, hindi ko na
HRTF in our
maintindihan
library.
pinagsasabi ng taong
Maybe
to.
you'll be sending us a video of your ears and your head, and we'll make a 3D model of them and synthesize the HRTF. Maybe you'll play an audio game to tune your HRTF. We'll be subtly
Tama
changing
na.
it as you play and home in on the HRTF that gives you the
Hindi na rin
highest
ako
score,
makahinga
meaning that it
sinasabi
matches
nito.
you the best. This is a journey we'll all be taking together over the next few years. Ultimately, we're committing to enabling everyone to experience that next level of realism. Hopefully, I've been able to illustrate a bit about our design and decision-making process today and why PlayStation 5 has the feature set that it does. Now comes the fun part. We get to see how the development community takes advantage of that feature set.
Uy, uy.
I'm hoping for the completely unexpected.
Yan na ba ito?
Will it come
Ito
from
na ba ito?
audio, ray tracing, the capabilities of the SSD, or something else? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Thank you for your time today.
Wow! Uy! Tapos na! Kakainis! Hello guys. Mukhang akala ko, though sinabi nilang for architecture yung design, I was for architecture yung isi-stream nila or live nila, pero I was expecting na ihaluan nila ng design feature ng PS5, pero mukhang wala. Disappointed. At ini-expect ko rin na i-reveal nila yung kahit GPU man lang. Hindi nila nabanggit actually. Binanggit nila yung RAM na 16 gig, pero nag-expect ako ng 32 gig RAM for PS5 kung i-utilize nila yung 8K reso for the coming future. Kasi sasabihin natin na in-native na nila for 4K, pero I think 4K and 16 gig is not enough. No. I'm not sure how they will do it, pero siguro tayo sa cost cutting, pero ayun. Gagawa na lang siguro ako ng video ng short and brief na mga napag-usapang architecture, and I'll try to explain it in a more layman's term para maintindihan ng lahat. Okay, so thank you guys for watching with me yung live ng PS5. Until next time, guys. Bye.